Thank you, everyone, for joining me for these live internet studies. My name is Ariel Ben Lyman Hanavi, and we're back into the schedule again, back into the swing of things. We took a break last week, or for the whole week, really, for the Thanksgiving weekend. And so now we're back on track. Remember that this study itself is an hour and a half long. We teach for two topics. The first topic is entitled Eschatology, a Biblical Study of End Time Events, the first segment. It is a full hour long. It covers topics related to end time events, rapture, questions. We're eventually working our way towards the book of Revelation. Believe it or not, we're just plugging along really slowly. We're currently on week 11, and we'll keep talking about this pre-wrath view of the rapture. So if you're interested in topics like that, stick around. Okay, let's jump into the first hour-long study. What you can see on your screen right now is the topical index. I've got 18 different topics that's going on right now. We're in the yellow one that says Topic 11, Making a Case for the Pre-Wrath View. And so let me bring up the PowerPoint slide this time. And this is the slide that I've been using to show the 4 different rapture views that we're discussing. I won't spend too much time on this. I want to jump right into the study itself. The question is often asked by way of timing and by way of assuming what is described as a final 7-year time frame in which God's going to enact certain key events on planet Earth. The question is often asked, when will God rapture the church? So assuming that 7-year period that goes by a few different names, I like to call it the 70th week of Daniel. Some people call it the 7-year tribulation. I don't like that name itself, but the 7-year time period. We've got 4 different views. Let me see if I can pull out my little pointer here. Yeah, here we go. The first view in the upper right corner, pre-trib rapture. What do they say? The pre-trib rapturists believe the church will be raptured before this final 7-year period known as Daniel's 70th week. Pretty basic. As far as the next view, called the mid-trib rapture, they believe the rapture will occur exactly halfway through the 7-year period, just before the beginning of what they call the Great Tribulation. And again, the theology of this view is pretty basic. It matches, more or less, as far as I can tell, the pre-trib view, as far as when they believe certain key events will happen. They just move the rapture up a bit. The lower left corner, it's getting cut off by my funny little pointer tool here, the name of it is, but it's called Post-tribulation rapture. And they believe that the rapture will occur following the 7-year period known as Daniel's 7th week. So again, as with the prior two, a lot of the main events on the 7-year time frame look identical. Right? We've got this giant period known as God's wrath or tribulation. We've got another smaller section called Great Tribulation, things like that. So a lot of those markers are identical, just radically shifts in when they think the rapture is going to happen. Which leads us to the final one on the lower right corner, the one I hold to, the one we're kind of zooming in on. This is the pre-wrath rapture. And the pre-wrath rapturists believe that within the 7-year time frame, some of the names of the events change as far as tribulation turns into beginning of sorrows. Great Tribulation still has the Great Tribulation. It's actually got the definite article now, the Great Tribulation. And then when does the rapture happen? Well, it occurs following the opening of what we would find out later on the book of Revelation as the 6th seal of the book of Revelation. The church will experience severe persecution by Antichrist, but will be snatched away, raptured, before God begins to pour out his wrath during the day of the Lord. So those are the 4 views that we're looking at. What I'm going to do eventually is work my way through some of these slides just by way of reference. You can see that here's the same 4 views that I mentioned just a moment ago, but now we've got a little bit of a timeline down at the bottom so you can see where some of the events land by way of 3.5 years, and then according to Daniel, there's an extra 30 days and an extra 45 days at the end of the 7-year period, totaling 45 days, in which some events will take place, which become important for our study later on. Here's another view of the same 4 views, another slide that shows those same 4 views: pre-trib, mid-trib, pre-wrath, post-trib. Notice that in the post-trib, this is where I was going with this, why I'm showing all these 4. Notice that in the post-trib, the rapture is at the far end, the far right of your slide. So it takes place, oops, didn't want to do that. It takes place right here. And it does so basically at the end of the 7 years, or maybe somewhere close to that. And important for their position, this is what we're going to be talking about tonight, important for their position is that the event known as rapture and the event that is commonly called second coming are really the same event, and they're really expected to happen at the same time. And so the movement upwards into the air to meet Jesus only results in a rapid drop back down to planet Earth, where we begin to experience him establishing his kingdom, whatever events are associated with that. But the point is, it's not necessary to hang around up in the air. There's no need to go off into heaven. Jesus himself simply is met by us, so we greet him in the air, similar to the way that ancient important people coming into a town would be met by the townspeople as they came out of town to meet him as he was traveling. They would meet him, and then, excuse me, and then everyone would accompany him back into town. So this is one of the positions of the post-trib rapture view. If we keep going in our slides, we'll find that there's an alternate, a modified version of this post-trib time frame that's known as post-trib pre-wrath, that's gaining a lot of popularity these days. So we could say it's maybe a 5th view, but I think it's safer to just say it's a 4th, the same as the 4th view. But what's special about them, or different than the classic post-trib, is that when it comes to rapture and day of the Lord, if you notice I'm circling it here, their rapture event takes place prior to the day of the Lord, and then the day of the Lord takes place next. Versus on the other version, on the standard post-trib view, the day of the Lord takes place first, and then the rapture. So in this version, they swap places, and I think this is a significant swap. Myself, it goes by a few different names. Joel Richardson calls this view hybrid, but what this does, and I think that this is actually the way to go. So I believe that there's a lot of important truth to this post-trib pre-wrath version. Because what it does is it takes the rapture, like in all versions, it takes the rapture and it places it in the correct sequence when it comes to day of the Lord. Rapture before wrath. Listen and repeat after me. Rapture before wrath. So rapture before wrath is what they do. Notice in when we compare them to the mid-trib, I just compared them to the pre-trib. When we compare them to pre-trib, we have the same thing. Rapture before wrath. Rapture then wrath. And then, of course, we pre-wrathers have always maintained that rapture comes before wrath. So this modified version of post-trib pre-wrath lines them up theologically and sequentially with all of the other 3 views that were already on the table from the get-go. And so, like, if I go backwards in the slide and we go back to this initial slide, you can see that in this version, instead of rapture then wrath, they have wrath then rapture. See how they're in the wrong order, wrong by way of what all the others are saying. Pre-trib says rapture, then wrath. That's what pre-tribbers say. Mid-tribbers say rapture, then wrath. And then pre-wrathers say rapture, then wrath. So we've all, the major 3 players have been championing rapture then wrath, but then post-trib is like, no, wrath first, then rapture. We're saying, no, come on board. So that's what they've done. They've finally decided that or at least someone has looked back at Scripture a little bit more carefully and said, no, we think rapture before wrath kind of works too. So thus we got post-trib, pre-wrath, and so they had to append the label pre-wrath after their name post-trib because they want to, excuse me, they want to make sure that everyone knows that they're pre-wrath too. All right, and then later on, I've got other slides going on here, just close-up views of the pre-trib, the mid-trib, the post-trib, and the pre-wrath view in case I need to get to them. Here's where we're going today. I wanted to make sure that everyone knew that I'm going to be using a brand new resource tonight, a gentleman by the name of Ron Wallace. I don't know if he's Pastor Ron Wallace or if he's Dr. Ron Wallace. I can't remember. We'll find out when I look at his resource. But if you recall from the slide that you're looking at right now, this is a slide that I made. I personally created this slide. And in this slide, what I'm trying to highlight is that, from my understanding, when we're looking at this Day of the Lord activity, excuse me, when we're looking at this event known as the Day of the Lord, this one single Day of the Lord, the Bible describes this event using a few names that are also singular: the parousia, the coming of the Lord, the erchomai, the movement of the Lord. So when we look at this slide, Yeshua's parousia is described in the Bible as one event. This is extremely significant in terms of understanding the timing of this particular event in the Bible because of its relevance for us as believers, and as well, it's relevant towards Israel, who's going to be experiencing these things when the time comes. If you recall, let me go backwards for a moment. If you recall, in the classic pre-trib rapture, they have their rapture way over here on the right side of the screen. And comparatively, they have their second coming way over here their rapture is on the left side of the screen, their second coming is on the right side of the screen, so they're separated by 7 full years at the least. And the driving force behind their decision to separate rapture from second coming is because in the theology of pre-trib rapture, there's something known as dispensationalism driving their understanding of where is the church in relationship to the 7-year time frame. And according to dispensationalism, the church and Israel are two separate entities. And as such, they live and occupy two different time frames, two different dispensations. Thus, dispensationalism needs to separate the rapture of the church into a different dispensation than the second coming of Jesus for Israel at the end of the 70th week. So this drives part of their separation from these into 7 full years. But what it effectively does is it creates 2 second comings. Functionally, they are 2 second comings, even if theologically they don't like to call it 2 second comings. In fact, according to the Bible, they cannot use the language of 2 second comings because the Greek doesn't support it, and the normative understanding of the passages from a face value reading doesn't support it either. And this is where we're going to go tonight. We're going to talk again about, is there 1 second coming? Are there 2 second comings? Again, if you corner a pre-tribber, a dispensational pre-tribber, he's going to tell you the church and Israel are 2 separate things. They're separated by 7 years. And there is a rapture, but it's secret, it's signless, it's imminent, it can happen at any moment. And yet the second coming is not secret, signless, and can happen at any moment. There are signs that precede the second coming. It is for Israel, the elect. It comes after certain events. It's timed. It's on a schedule. It's got a sequencing to it, etc., etc. There are certain precursor events, certain signs that foretell it. So based on these discrepancies between what they're reading in the Bible about the event known as rapture and what they read in the Bible about the event known as second coming, pre-tribbers come to the conclusion that these are 2 separate events on Jesus' schedule. And they don't want to say that are 2 separate comings, but functionally speaking, that's what it turns out to be. Now, when we turn to the mid-tribbers, we end up with the same thing. We have, functionally speaking, we have the rapture here separated by the second coming here. Although I don't know for certain that they think that these are two comings. They might say that they're just two phases of one coming. However, again, when we get to the post-trib, the post-trib does something quite biblically accurate. The post-tribbers take the second coming and the rapture, and they combine them into one single event, which is actually the way the Bible describes them. Now listen for a moment, because I know some of you are thinking, but Ariel, you're a pre-wrather. You've got the two separate events too. Aren't you guilty of doing the same thing that the dispensationalists are doing? Nope, I'm not. Hang with me for a moment. Post-tribbers see them as one event, and they need to hold to that theology because the Bible doesn't describe two separate second comings anywhere. The Greek doesn't support two separate second comings, and neither does the normative use of the languages leading up to the narratives that we encounter, such as the Olivet Discourse narratives in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and Paul's narrative in 1 Corinthians, as well as 1 and 2 Thessalonians, as well as Peter's narrative in 2 Peter, and then we finally get to the book of Revelation, and that's where the post-tribbers are going to run into some problems. But forget about Revelation for a second. The second coming and the rapture are seen as one second coming. That's kind of their ace in the hole card that they're going to play over and over again. And I think that's not a bad card to play. There's one second coming. Now, let's go to the pre-wrath rapture. I modified this chart in the week while we were away. I modified the arrows and moved the word second coming around. And so what we're going to find out tonight is that what I've done is I've shown you that there's a pre-wrath rapture, and then there's a significant event that takes place near the end of this sequence of events. But what I did is I labeled the entire event as second coming. Why did I do that? It's because we pre-wrathers have always agreed. Now I can go to this slide. We've always maintained that there's one single parousia, one single coming, but there are two significant events. So in this slide, this is my older version, I had the rapture over here on the left, I had the day of the Lord activities in the middle, and I had the second coming over on the right. And I called this giant blue time frame the day of the Lord, i.e. the wrath of God. And so you can see this was the way I'd been articulating it, but I wasn't quite satisfied. I didn't like, there was something kind of gnawing at me with some of the nomenclature here, and I didn't feel like I was doing a proper job. So what I did is this week I modified it. So here's the new version. All right, I even changed the color scheme so you can tell that there's old and new. Right, the old one is blue, and the new one's primarily green. And here's what changed. It's still Yeshua's parousia. So looking at this, it's Yeshua's parousia. It's one single second coming. I've relabeled some of my verbiage so I can describe it better. There's one single second coming, yet with two significant events. So I'm not giving up on the two significant events, but I'm bringing my language closer to what I believe is a biblical representation of the single second coming. So what does this look like? We still have a rapture event on the far left. We still have these middle events, which would be the trumpets and bowls in the middle. But on the far right, I relabeled the one that used to be called Second Coming on the far right, that arrow pointing down. I just labeled it Armageddon because it falls in line with the significant event on the far end, namely the event that takes place near the end of the week, probably actually in that 30-day period, right after the 30-day period, if I remember, just before the 45-day period. And what's significant about this event is that it's at the Battle of Armageddon that the Antichrist and the false prophet are both tossed into the lake of fire. And that's one of the reasons why I call it a significant event. In comparison to the rapture arrow on the far left, with the arrow pointing up, the significance about the rapture is that the rapture includes the resurrection. And it's the event that's spoken prominently in Scripture of Jesus gathering the elect, Jesus gathering, sorry about the cough there, Jesus gathering his elect, Jesus gathering the true church to himself. What I also did is in the middle, I used to call this just I used to just call this the day of the Lord, but I relabeled it the second coming. This doesn't mean that it's not the day of the Lord. It really is. I mean, and I still have the subtitle that says, i.e. the day of the Lord, the wrath of God. But the reason I call it the second coming is because by the time we get to the Apostolic Scriptures, the New Testament, when the disciples begin questioning our Lord about this great event, they use the language of second coming, the parousia, instead of using the Old Testament nomenclature of tell us when will these things be, what will be the sign of the day of the Lord, and of your when will these things happen, and what will be the sign of the day of the Lord. My point is, Yeshua gives details leading up to what we're going to call the wrath of God, the day of the Lord. In other words, he starts describing a lot of this activity in the Olivet Discourses. I actually maintain, as a pre-wrather, that he is actually giving details and then he dead ends at the initiation of the day of the Lord. So it's necessary for you to notice what's going on in this little green box below. It says, so we're talking about the second coming, i.e. the day of the Lord, the wrath of God. I reworded some of this as well. The second coming, there's a single second coming. The parousia is the single second coming. This event is initiated by the rapture. So the day of the Lord / wrath of God / the second coming is initiated by the rapture. Sometime after the midpoint of the week, after the Great Tribulation, and after the sixth seal sign. What else happens is that God's wrath includes, on the pre-wrath model, both the trumpets and the bowls, but not the seals. And I think this is going to fare well when it comes to, when we finally get to the book of Revelation, start examining the seven seals, followed by the seven trumpets, followed by the seven bowls. We'll find that there is an image that is known by the people in John's day of a scroll with seals on the outside. And I'll flash this in post-production. In fact, you're probably looking at it right now. You're not seeing it in the class, but those of you who are watching the YouTube video, you're watching this little imagery of what the seven sealed scroll might have looked like. And indeed, we've got ancient versions that we've unearthed in real life. Maybe some of those slides show those. But the point is that an ancient scroll, such as the one you're seeing on your screen, was blocked from access by seals on the outside. And so there's this obvious logic to the fact that you have to break the seal before you can access the contents. Well, when it comes to John describing the details of the events related to the seals, and when we compare those to the events related to the trumpets and the bowls, we find that there's this similar logic going on. You can't access the scroll until you break all seven seals on the outside, all of them. And so I believe that lends credibility to understanding that the seals themselves are not the contents of the scrolls. This is just logic, makes common sense with what the ancients would have understood, makes common sense to us moderns as well. So you can't access the scroll until you break all the seals. So the seals are not to be equated with the contents. They're two separate things. Yet there is meant to be some similar themes of the seals to the trumpets to the bowls. All of them have seven, and there's something significant that happens at the seventh of each one. And so I do believe that there is a thematic story being told by the three sets of seals, trumpets, bowls, that's meant for us to understand that there's a little bit of an overlap in the themes, but doesn't have to force an overlap in the events themselves. So when we get to it, we're going to find out again that trumpets, bowls, and seals don't have to be the same event, yet they can still carry the same theme. So the contents of the scroll is this middle part that you're seeing where it says the second coming, the day of the Lord, the wrath of God. And then that culminating event on the far right, the Armageddon, would represent what would naturally be the final wrath of God being poured out, where it results in the destruction of the Antichrist and the false prophet, and of course that spells relief for the people of God. Okay, we're not going to spend all of our time on these charts. What we're going to do instead is turn now to a gentleman by the name of Ron Wallace. And as I mentioned, he is going to provide a commentary for us to work down through. So here's his website. I'll show you this first. It's at BibleFragrances.com. Fragrances as in plural, an island of biblical truth in a sea of confusion. Bible fragrances, right? Fragrance as in like perfume or flower. Fragrance, plural. That's his website, but we're not going to go there tonight. I just wanted to make you aware of his resource. Where we're going to go instead is to a blog site that has audio blogs or podcasts, we call them now these days. And this is at BibleProphecyDaily.com. And I'm subscribed to this particular podcast. I recommend it. So I will put this podcast link in the description videos. And I'm parked on specifically Ron Wallace's contribution to this particular blog podcast. And so this is what we're going to work from today. Let me just read the little description right here in the middle about Ron Wallace. It says, Ron Wallace teaches through the Bible Fragrances Biblical Studies Institute, BFBSI, organized for the purpose of interpreting and communicating the Word of God through this website and through live Bible studies. Ron has written many articles on Bible prophecy from a premillennial and pre-wrath perspective. His various studies and commentaries can be found on the Bible Fragrances website at BibleFragrances.com. Okay, so that's the little blurb about Ron. What we're going to do now is I'm going to work down, I'm going to scroll all the way down to the bottom, and we're going to start actually, that's where we're going to go. The very first podcast that he contributed to this particular podcast show is a podcast entitled There's Only One Second Coming. And so let's click on that, and we're going to work our way down through this. And I'm going to change the view so it's easier on my eyes. There's Only One Second Coming podcast. By the way, this particular podcast, if you were to play it, I think it's about, if I remember, maybe 30 minutes long. It's not very long. And you can download it and listen to it offline and things like that. It's a great podcast. So we're going to work through the transcript that has been provided to this particular website. Okay? So that's where we're at. So let's start right here. And this will occupy, give me a second, I'm just setting these. There we go. This will occupy the remainder of our study. This is the bulk of our study. What I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be interacting with Mr. Wallace's notes here, and as needed, I'll pause and interject my own commentary, my own thoughts, and where there are scriptural passages, if he didn't quote them, I'll probably look them up so that we can make sure we know we're fact-checking him, basically. Just before we get started, he is a pre-wrather, just like myself. And primarily, what I found to be very helpful from Mr. Wallace is that he articulates this one single parousia with two significant, or at least more than two, but at least two, I should say there's more than two events within the coming of the Lord, but there are two significant ones, meaning the initiation event and then the culminating event. If you decide that culmination means end of the 70th week, then yes. If you decide that the day of the Lord also includes the 1,000-year millennium and the as well as the judgment seat of Christ at the far end of that, well then the Battle of Armageddon is not maybe the end of all things. And I'm not saying it is the end of all things. I'm just saying it's the end of the 70th week, or at least the end of the Antichrist, right? That's significant. If we can say that the Antichrist comes in, that's significant enough for me. That's the point I'm trying to drive home. So let's read Mr. Wallace. Ron Wallace talks about the hope of the Apostolic Church concerning Christ's second coming and being founded in the very teachings of Jesus. Jesus made it perfectly clear that he was indeed going to come again and deliver his believing ones out from this world and take them to a heavenly one. Again, I'm actually doing something that I don't believe that other PREWRATHers are making a big push to do, other than maybe Mr. Wallace and myself. Kirshner does it occasionally. Zion's Hope with Rosendahl has some light mentions of what I'm going to be talking about here and there. Charles Cooper mentions it in passing here and there. Aaron Eggman talks about it here and there. Van Kampen didn't highlight it extremely pertinently, and Marv Rosenthal himself didn't make a big point to push, or Chris White also doesn't make a big push to talk about what I'm talking about. But I think it is significant, the topic that I'm embarking on, which I've been kind of going on for the last few shows, which is why I'm emphasizing it. The post-tribbers and the PREWRATHers have so much in common that I firmly believe that we should combine our resources. I believe that we should emerge into one single view, and I really like that title, Post-trib PREWRATH, because it accurately portrays the sequence of the view that I champion, which is that there will be a post-tribulational rapture, meaning rapture, then wrath. Rapture, then wrath, yeah. We could really say tribulation, then rapture, then wrath, if you want to get technical, right? If I go back over to right here, then what I'm talking about is tribulation, then rapture, then wrath. So these three events, tribulation, then rapture, then wrath. That, I think, is the proper sequence of events. So I like when post-trib PREWRATHers say post-trib, right? Because it's after the Great Tribulation that the wrath takes place. Post-trib, but then it is pre-wrath. So the rapture event itself, which is between those two, it's necessary to have a rapture that cuts short the tribulation from the day of the Lord. The rapture is the event between those two. It's sandwiched between those. So I think that Ron Wallace is doing a good service, and I'm following in his footsteps by trying to highlight this idea that in this sequence of events, when we look at the words of our Lord in comparison to what Paul left us, and then finally compare all of that to the book of Revelation. There's three kind of big areas of Scripture that we need to keep juggling all at the same time. We find that there is absolutely only one single second coming, even though there are a series of events that the second coming contains. It is absolutely one second coming. And this is in contradistinction to the pre-tribbers and the dispensationalists who separate the rapture out there 7 years away in no man's land, secret, signless, imminent, and it's in a different dispensation altogether. It's just in a different part of the universe than the second coming. And I don't think the Bible warrants that. So Ron's going to bring this out much better than I could. And so I defer to him for this. I apologize if my versions of describing this have been messy. I know that it is a point of difference between many post-tribbers. I know post-tribbers who, Dr. Brown being one of them, who will just hammer this point home. There is only one second coming. And usually he's aiming his argument, his wording, at the pre-tribbers, because they're the ones that functionally keep saying that there's 2 second comings. Even if they don't say it that way, functionally, that's what they're holding to. I keep qualifying by saying functionally, because I know they don't like to say that there's 2 second comings, because they can't. The Bible doesn't give us permission to say that there's 2 second comings. And so I'm making a big point so that you understand that we PREWRATHers are not guilty of the same error of saying that there are 2 second comings, even though we believe that the rapture and the Armageddon event are 2 different events, unlike the post-tribbers. So this is where I'm trying to find some common ground with the post-tribbers. And I'm actually trying to win you over. I am trying to be convincing. This is, after all, making a case for the pre-wrath view. I'm trying to get you post-tribbers who've already left your pre-trib camp. You already realize the errors of dispensationalism and the pre-trib rapture, the signless, secret, imminent version of the rapture. And you're already come on board with the idea that it's not signless, it's not secret, it's not imminent. At least up to a point, it's not imminent. And you've understood now that there's only one second coming instead of two functional ones. Now I just need you to get to the point where you've agreed with Yeshua that there's one second coming. You've agreed with Paul that there's one rapture or one second coming. And yet now I need you to understand that the book of Revelation doesn't allow you to smash those two events on top of one another. That's where we're going, partially with what Ron Wallace is going to help us. He continues, there are some who believe that Jesus taught two distinct comings. Who is Ron Wallace picking on right now? He's picking on the pre-tribbers. He is not picking on the pre-wrathers. He is a pre-wrather. He doesn't believe there's two distinct comings. And neither do I, right? Remember the little slide that I recreated, right? Not that one. I'm going to take that one out. This is the new one. There's one second coming. There's one parousia. Got two significant events, but there is one second coming. So me and Ron are on the same page. He continues, one second coming for the rapture and one for the battle of Armageddon. Again, he's picking on the pre-tribbers. Such a distinction, Ron says, is found only in theological assumptions that have no clear scriptural support, rather than in the plain and simple language of Christ's words.